Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Friday, June 12th, 2020, and I want to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. All right, so let's talk about the quote unquote giants or large hominids, as I like to call them, in First Peoples, Native Peoples folklore in the Americas here, in North America to be exact, and recounts, the folklore of various different native peoples, tribes about stories about the giants. So let's take a look at some of those stories. But before I even get to that, I just wanted to draw your attention to some of the things that I've gone over on my channel, which is pretty much suppressed archaeology, suppressed history. And, it's not that it's alternative or anything. This is mainstream, but for some reason it's suppressed. And there's obviously a reason why that might be. And I mean, I'm sure we can all speculate what it might be, but if you don't know and you're a new subscriber, I reviewed this book by a pretty famous author, one of the first, the first author to write um, a sort of collection of stories about archaeology, the actual accounts, because prior to his writing the book, you could only find reports of archaeology in newspapers and such, magazines, etc. There was no books on archaeology, but this fellow put together a book on archaeology in the late 40s, and was the first of its kind. So he's a very important guy in the field of archaeology, and he was just a writer. But one of the criticisms that I've heard, at least when I've tried to talk about this book with some other people and about stories about the giants and suppressed archaeology and anthropology, was that he was a big shot in the Ministry of Propaganda for the Nazis because he was a prominent journalist and newspaperman and a editor of a important publishing house in Germany. He was well known among writers throughout the world before the war, before World War II, and then he was conscripted. He was a German citizen, and he was conscripted by the Nazis to do their propaganda. And this is one of the critics. Well, he's a propagandist, blah blah blah. But whenever I hear that, I have to tell people, "Oh yeah, well, you want to talk about propaganda? Well, don't forget that it was Edward L. Bernays in 1928 that wrote the rule book on propaganda." Okay, wrote the rule book on propaganda. Okay, Eddie Bernays wrote the rule book on propaganda, and he was a close advisor to Woodrow Wilson. Okay, so you want to talk about propaganda? It wasn't the rule book on propaganda wasn't written by a German or a Nazi or anything. It was written by an American. Okay, in 1928, and the guy just happened to be the nephew of Sigmund Freud. All right, so he's responsible for all the good psyops that are directed against us for time immemorial. But this whole idea that Nazis and Germans and Nazis are the ones that are, so proficient in propaganda, well, they got a lot of their ideas from us, and also their ideas about, um, eugenics and all that kind of stuff, because we were busy, sterilizing people that we thought, shouldn't be, reproducing. And the Germans admired us for that. So don't forget all of these things. So Saran was this ex, propagandist that worked for the Ministry of Propaganda, but his interest was in archaeology. And who better to tell whether something's, baloney or not, as somebody who was in charge of the Ministry of Propaganda there. Okay, so look. His interest is archaeology, and he was a super smart guy. He was a well-known writer. He was captured by the Americans, and he came here to the United States. He lived here in the United States right after the war, 1952. He came here to live. He didn't like Nazis. He didn't like that job, but what could he do? Okay, or take a bullet to his head and his whole family killed? He did what he had to do. All right, his interest was archaeology. So he wrote this book, The First American, and basically in this book, he didn't like the way American archaeology and anthropology was being handled. And he's the one that brought the story about Galena Canyon and these people of some weird phenotype that were slightly more robust, like the people at Lovelock Cave, okay? In other words, giants, but they say they're not really giants at a time when people were average height of 5'3" and 5'5" for males, okay? You stand there, if you're 5'3" or 5'5", stand next to somebody who's 7 foot tall. I saw that in my lifetime. Okay, a 4'11" person standing next to a 7 foot person. Okay, somebody down the block, the girl I went to school with. Okay, she went to college and she met this basketball player who's 7 feet tall. She's 4'11". Okay, it was ridiculous looking. God bless her. I mean, but the guy looked like a giant. All right. When you're 5'3" and 5'5", people who are 7 foot tall are giants. Okay. Mainstream scientists who study, human growth and human height, they're the ones who say anyone of, 6 foot or taller before 1800 would be somebody of unusual height. Not me. They do. All right. Yeah, today it's not so unusual, but we're not talking about people from today, right? People in the past. So the people of Galena Canyon, the people at Salmon Ruins, the people at Hoven Weep, the people at Lovelock, the people at the Snaketown, Arizona, okay? They're all the same people, all the same civilization. Okay, this is the lost history of the West there that they're burying in Galena Canyon. Was a story that Saran thought shouldn't be suppressed. Okay, so if you haven't seen my video on Galena Canyon and reviewed the chapters in C.W. Saran's book, The First American, you should take a look at those videos because he wanted to tell us something. Okay, and he's a super smart guy. And your friend Budcat7 is a pretty super smart guy too, because you see his name here, C.W. Saran. His name was Kurt W. Marek. Okay, Kurt with a K, W. Marek. So this is his nom de plume, right? His pen name, right? As a writer, because that's all he was. He was a writer. Okay. His name was Kurt W. Marek. Saran backwards is Marek. Okay? And he just replaced the K's with C's. Right? I don't know who's ever noticed that, but I sure did. Your buddy Budcat7, I'm a pretty smart guy. I was looking at that and I said, Kurt W. Marek. Some kind of anagram or something like that. So in any case, your buddy figured it out here. But in his nom de plume, he's trying to tell us something. You got to read between the lines, okay? He had to be very polite. And he tells us about Galena Canyon and what happened there and how the peaceful Pueblos genocided these giants, okay? It's a common theme among the folklore of the native peoples to portray these giants as just vicious brutes, but not in all cases. Okay, it seems, and try to bring you on this channel the stories of the good giants and ones that are actually suppressed. For example, one that you're not going to hear about in this article here, all right, about King Mangatoshi of the Montauk tribe right here on Long Island, where I happen to be at right now, right? I take it from Rutenberg's history book, which is based on Schoolcraft. These are two noted historians from the Library of Congress. And they write about King Mangatoshi, the chief of the Montauk tribe, who is a fierce protector of his peoples, and he was of giant stature. And not only was he a smart and fierce protector of his people, but he also built canals. Okay, so look, that was another thing that Saram in his book was trying to tell us about the people at Snaketown, where they developed these canals, these complex system of canals there. Whereas today, if we were to do the same sort of project, we would need a team of surveyors to go out there and, map out the whole topography over there and all the, levels and all that kind of stuff. So, look, it's, how did these people do it? And what if they made a mistake? It's an awfully large project to undertake without the use of, surveying equipment, transits, etc. So, Saram was questioning this, and he was also trying to tell us about the giants as well, but in a very polite way, because you had to be that way, even in 1971 when he wrote the book. And I tell you about King Mangatoshi, okay, this giant chief of the Montauk people, who apparently wasn't a cannibal or anything. He was just a fierce protector of his people. So you see this sort of dynamic going on where the, royalty of the tribe are, of giant stature, and the subjects are of average height. This was this king, and he also built canals, okay? Things that would take millions of dollars and using today's, heavy equipment to do, this guy was doing around Long Island sometime in the past. All right. So you can try looking it up on the internet or whatever. You'll probably have to go through a lot to find the story of King Mangatoshi because it's being suppressed, either because he's a giant or he built these canals or both. That doesn't matter, but why not tell the story? It's right there in a book in Rutenberg's Tribes of the Hudson's Valley, 1750, okay, based on the work of Schoolcraft from earlier times, all right, two noted historians in the Library of Congress, all right? So, I don't know. Why are they suppressing that? But you won't hear about that story in here, and it's just a shame you won't hear about it. But I guess they did the best they could because the site doesn't exist anymore or whatever. But let's read from this. It's not that long. We'll get through it. But let me read to you what it says here for education purposes or whatever this site was for, trying to get the message, but through to people. There is strong evidence that Native American folklore about giants is true. 7 feet tall skeletons have been found in burial mounds of southeast towns that were home to the ancestors of the Creek Indians. As European settlers pushed across North America, newspapers printed stories about the discovery of giant skeletons. Some were described as being normal human beings, but very tall. Others had skulls with primitive features. The most credible stories of giant skeletons were concentrated in the Appalachians, Cumberland Plateau, and Ohio Basin. They were typically found in graves lined with stone slabs or field stones, known as the stone box grave culture. In 1821, 7 feet tall skeletons in stone lined sarcophaguses were found in White County, Tennessee burial area. Okay, so look, these are all things that you could get directly from the internet, those stories that, we all know. Nothing new here, but, here's a site trying to put it all together for education purposes. I give them a nice try, but it doesn't exist anymore. But this page is still here. It's good. Legends from Midwest tribes tell of lightly pigmented yellow or red haired giants living around the Great Lakes or southern Canada. Occasionally, these giants traveled south into their territories. While some encounters were benign, others resulted in warfare. The Cherokees claim to have killed the last white Indians while still living in Kentucky and West Virginia. Again, the giant genocide, which was going on all around the world at basically the same time periods, I'm thinking anyway. Okay. The reports from the Bible, and these are time periods that were, inhabitants right here in the Americas were doing the same exact thing. Why Joshua had to go and kill everybody in that city and all their animals and the babies and why there's never any explanation, just God says go ahead and do that. It doesn't sound like a legit reason to me for some God who's just go and kill it. What did they do? Something bad? They're just giants. Western pioneers sometimes found what they assumed were giant fossilized human skeletons along with exposed banks and in caves. They describe these skulls as much thicker than modern humans. Some claim the skulls had double rows of teeth, as we heard about many times in Jim Vieira's work and my story about Paul Bunyan, based on a real guy who had double rows of teeth. Several Western tribes tell of past confrontations with lightly pigmented giants with either blonde or red hair. The Paiutes claim that the giants were cannibals who hunted the Paiutes for food. They repeatedly attacked the giants until their numbers dwindled. The surviving giants were cornered in a cave, then either shot with arrows or asphyxiated by setting a fire at the entrance. How sweet of them. Yes, the Lovelock Cave people were called tool eaters, aquatic plants. They weren't called baby eaters or children eaters or man eaters or ugly, horrible purple monsters with red hair. They were called tool eaters, some aquatic plant, because bloodthirsty, giants, with blood dripping from their teeth, they're always interested in eating aquatic plants, to go along with the baby arms that they put in their woven baskets that they snack on while watching TV, right? Baloney. In 1754, George Washington was colonel of the Virginia Colonial Militia. While hostilities broke out with France, he supervised construction of Fort Loudon in Winchester, Virginia. Laborers digging the fort's foundation uncovered a cemetery of 7-foot skeletons of what appeared to be Native American artifacts. The skeletons were viewed and reported by Washington. It is not known what happened to them, of course. This discovery gives credibility to reports of 7-foot tall skeletons discovered in West Virginia, Kentucky, southern Ohio, and southern Indiana. In 1541, De Soto's army traveled from the Florida Panhandle to Middle Georgia. Officers noted that the area's people were more culturally advanced and average a foot taller than the Spanish. These were the Oconee and Tamaulipas branches of the Muskegon culture, ancestors of the Creek Indians. The Spanish called them Los Indios Gigantes, the giant Indians. De Soto's chroniclers claim that some great sons, chief priests of the ancestral Creek provinces, were 7 feet tall. To a 5 foot 4 inch Spanish soldier, such a man would indeed appear to be a giant. Yes, indeedy. In the mid 20th century, archaeologists found 7 feet tall skeletons in royal burials at Okmulgee National Monument and Etowah Mounds National Historic Landmark. Both sites were ancestral to the Creek Indians, adding credibility to the Spanish stories. Creek men today, especially in northern Alabama and Georgia, tend to be exceptionally tall. Still got some of them giant genes kicking around in there. During 1918, archaeologists discovered over 10,000 Neolithic artifacts in a Nevada cave. Many seem too large to have been made by standard sized humans. A male and a female skeleton were also found. The male was said to be 8 feet tall. The skulls are on display at the Humboldt County Museum. So the skulls are supposedly on display, but I don't believe they are anymore. But they were, I heard. But they gotta, just like King Mangatoshi, they gotta bury that too. In 1521, Francisco Gordillo and Pedro de Cuello sailed to the Carolina coast to capture Native American slaves. While they captured 70 natives in Chicora, their relations with another province, Duher, was amiable. The people of Duher were described as Europeans who owned a few metal tools. They had red to brown hair, tan skin, and gray eyes. The men wore full beards and were much taller than the Spanish. Duher's houses and pottery were similar to those of American Indians. The Duher lived much like other American Indians, except for one thing. They had horses and they raised livestock, including chickens, ducks, geese, and deer. See? Domestication, they say that the American peoples, the native peoples, didn't have domestic animals, but they kept these animals just like they keep domestic animals, but they weren't domesticated. All Spanish sources say that Duher had large herds of domesticated deer, and they made cheese from deer milk. While dairy deer seems impossible, several Gaelic tribes in Ireland and Scotland had domesticated dairy deer before dairy cows. The people of Duher were also skilled farmers. They grew large quantities of corn, grain, potatoes, and other vegetables developed in the New World. The king of Duher was named Datha. The Spanish described Datha, now it says Duffa, as a giant, the largest man they had ever seen. His wife was equally tall. Datha had brightly colored pigments or tattoos that distinguished him from the commoners. Duher can be translated in two ways, as the Heister, place of clan hair, or Duher, place of the Irish. Datha is a medieval Irish Gaelic word that means painted. Since Datha's skin was covered with pigments or tattoos, as was traditional among the Celts, this name makes perfect sense. Well, if they're saying here that they could have been a Celt influence, I'm going to say that the Celts were influenced by these people from the Americas. It's the other way around. That's what I say on my channel. It's not that the Celts influenced these people influenced the Celts. Okay? Prove otherwise. Just because it's the New World, no, it's not. It's not the New World. Not with 30,000-year-old civilizations in South America, it isn't. The description of Duher's people matches descriptions by Midwestern tribes of the red-haired giants in Canada. It is quite plausible Duher's people were not only Irish Gaelic Caucasians in the Western Hemisphere before Columbus, but as I just told you, it's not that way. It's the other way around. And the Bell Beaker people were a little bit smaller. They looked just like the Adena, but they were a little bit smaller and different, but were similar to the Adena, and Adena were the big ones with the larger craniums than the Bell Beaker people. It came from here, folks. The influence came from here. The Americas, the horse, the camel came from here. Influence of world culture came from here, from the Americas. This is the old world. The rest of the world is the new world. That's what I say. All right. And to so many anthropologists and archaeologists in South America, they say maybe Sumeria wasn't the cradle of civilization. All right. So take that and chew on it. All right. So this is often the kinds of things that people say that go along with the giants, but it's the other ways around. All right. And there's other stories about the Celts here in America at a much later date for different reasons, as was everybody on this planet made regular trips to the Americas thousands of years ago, 7 and 8 thousand years ago, to the 3,000 foot and 2,000 foot artificial harbors right here off Long Island. Perfectly symmetrical artificial harbors, 2,000 and 3,000. What do you need a harbor, artificial harbor, 2,000, 3,000 feet long, 7 and 8 thousand years ago? I don't know. Ask King Mangatoshi. Apparently he knew, and he was a giant that you never heard about, and you can't hear about unless you do the research like I do, right? Brought to you right here on this channel. I'll put some links to some of my videos that talk about King Mangatoshi and Galena Canyon as well, because we need to talk about that again and often. All right, guys. So anyway, if you like the video, please hit the like button, and I will be coming back with you with another video on the giants real soon. I want to talk about some Bigfoot connection to the giants. So let's talk about that a little bit too, based on Native American folklore. All right. All right, guys. Anyway, Budcat7 signing off. A peace.